This week's readings run the gamut from high culture to popular culture. In the music, poetry, and memoirs we're reading this week, we can see experiences of the war filtered through a variety of lenses. Let's start with the music. Some of the songs are soldier songs, songs that are constructed like folk songs from pre-existing music and new-made words. We have authentic recordings, so they're clean, but of course the original ones were often profane. We also have music hall songs. These would have been performed as entertainment in theaters that specialized in variety shows. Some of these are sentimental, like There's a Long, Long Trail. Others are comical, like Goodbye-Ye. Music hall songs would have been heard by large audiences and were the popular music of the day. Because the piano was the center of home entertainment at this time, sheet music would have been sold, allowing people to bring the music home to sing and play it. Of course, soldiers would have heard this popular music and would have sung it as they marched and trained, just like soldiers do today. But of course, there is also a music hall song that the soldiers wouldn't have cared for much, We Don't Want to Lose You. This song is sentimental, but it has a very particular goal, to get men in the audience to enlist in the Army. At the end of a music hall show, there would be a patriotic display and a speech by a recruiting officer. Then, someone would sing this song as men in the audience streamed forward to enlist. The point, of course, was to simultaneously shame the men who were not in uniform and to downplay the rigors of Army life, implicitly comparing it to a fun adventure. Once the men experienced Army life, they tended to think the rosy image of this song was a lie they'd been sold. The 3 soldier songs on our listening list are particularly interesting. Mademoiselle from Armentières is a famously filthy song, although obviously we have a clean version that became popular in Britain, brought there from France by returning soldiers. Hanging on the Old Barbed Wire is very typical of soldier songs in every war. It works through all the people who make the soldier's life a misery, chiefly superior officers, mocking them in turn. Those of you who are veterans of the military will recognize this kind of song from your own service days. But this song ends grimly, with the battalion hanging on the old barbed wire. We can picture the scene, opposing trenches with no man's land in between, each trench line protected by barbed wire. Before an attack, artillery would be aimed at the opposing side's wire with the idea of cutting it, which really never worked in practice. Lionel Sotheby talks about this in his letter to his mother, calling it the old fault, wire not cut, so that we know, even in early 1915, this problem was well established. In the case of an attack, the soldiers would emerge from their trenches, cross through their own wire which they had cut by hand overnight, and charge across no man's land. If they survived that, the idea was to push through the enemy's wire. Of course, if it hadn't been cut, the soldiers would be stuck there, easy prey for artillery, snipers, and machine gunners. Many soldiers died trying to make it through the wire, and because the conditions were so bad, it was often not possible to retrieve their bodies. One of the horrors of the war was standing in your own trench, watching your friends and comrades decomposing in front of you. The senseless loss of life and the horrific way the soldiers died are memorialized in Hanging on the Old Barbed Wire. We're Here Because We're Here also captures the grim nature of the Great War. The soldiers who volunteered, and the ones later on who were drafted, were all told that they were fighting for honor, for glory, to defend democracy. This song reveals how the men themselves see it after arriving at the front. There's no reason for the suffering, no glory to be won. We're here because we're here, no other reason at all. This feeling is similar to one that some of the shell-shocked soldiers at Craig Lockhart have in Regeneration. Rivers notes that it worries him that Sassoon, for instance, doesn't talk about the future at all, but just imagines his life as endless experience of war, followed by meaningless death. An interesting public art project using this song happened in Britain on July 1, 2016, the 100th anniversary of the start of the Battle of the Somme. All over the country, men in authentic World War I uniforms appeared in public places, such as train stations, parks, and city streets. They were silent, but if someone approached them to ask what they were doing, they would produce a card with the name, rank, and service number of someone who had died on the first day of the Somme battle. Periodically, they gathered and sang, "We're here because we're here." the only act of speech they performed all day. You can find on Blackboard a link to a short film made by the producers of the art project. The poems on this week's list reflect soldiers' growing sense that the war offers anything but glory and fun, a word frequently used in music hall songs and in propaganda as a descriptor of war service. In Owen's Miners, for instance, the poet begins with a meditation on a colliery disaster that had temporarily pushed war news out of the headlines. As the poem progresses, though, the colliery disaster becomes the disaster of the war, and just as coal is made from the bodies of long-dead prehistoric creatures, Owen predicts that one day he and the other poor lads will be coal, sacrifices unknown and names forgotten, burning unconsciously on someone's hearth. This poem is quiet and understated, but it captures the same sense of pointlessness that animates "We're here because we're here." Remember that before the First World War, young men were recruited to the Army with promises of glory and honor. The reality of that war was so different that it forever altered the way we think about and speak of war. Of course, war has always been grim, has always involved loss and death. But the impersonality of this war, the way so many soldiers were killed by artillery shells as they were boiling water for tea or walking about on minor errands, made all combatants think of the war as having especially killed the notions that previously had made war tolerable. This poem is also notable for its technical innovation, use of a rhyme form called slant rhyme or half rhyme or imperfect rhyme. In perfect rhyme, the kind you grew up with in nursery rhymes, the vowel and later consonant sounds of a word are retained, with only the first consonant sound changed. Fair, pear, near, here, spider, beside her. You can think about a Shakespeare sonnet, which has the rhyme scheme ABAB, CD, EFEF, GG, and is 14 lines of iambic pentameter. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang, upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, and seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as on the deathbed where it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceiv'st, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. Looking at Shakespeare's sonnet, which I chose because Owen echoes it in part, you can see that all the rhymes are perfect. Behold rhymes with cold, hang with sang, day with away, west with rest. Now look at Owen's poem. He rhymes earth with hearth and coal with recall. This isn't because the English accent makes these words sound alike, or because Owen doesn't know what he's doing. You can look at the other Owen poems for this week and see him using perfect rhyme with no trouble. No, what makes Owen rhyme leaves and lives, or ferns and fawns, is a desire to capture, in a poem whose apparent affect is calm and quiet, a sitting by the fireside poem, the sense of unease that the war brought to all it touched. In Owen's usage here, the consonant sounds of the words, including the first sound, are preserved. It is the vowel that changes, and it moves really just a half step away to a related and similar vowel that is just enough off the expected sound to make readers feel that something is not quite right. We feel the dis-ease that the poem conveys through the physical sense of our own hearing as we read the poem. This becomes a frequent innovation of Owen's, and one of the things that he is known for as a technical poet. This gives us an opportunity, too, to think about how the techniques of poetry support the message of the poem. In this case, the dis-ease created through slant rhyme reminds us that the peace and serenity of the speaker's apparent surrender to the inevitability of his fate must always be heard ironically as well. Sassoon's poem Sick Leave, an early version of which is printed in Regeneration as a poem Sassoon offered to Rivers as explanation for his decision to return to the war, highlights another important idea about the war, the importance of bonds between soldiers. Comradeship, sometimes called esprit de corps, is a vital part of every army or military force. In fact, Much of basic training is aimed at getting new soldiers to diminish their ties to friends and family from home and to refocus those affections on their unit mates. On the battlefield, comradeship means that soldiers in a unit have one another's backs, literally. It means that each member of the unit would die to protect the unit, which increases the unit's chance of survival. Most soldiers consider this a sacred promise, that they will look out for one another, even to the extent of retrieving a comrade's body from the battlefield so that it can be returned home. Many of the medals awarded in the First World War are for soldiers who risked their own lives in order to bring back wounded comrades or bodies of killed comrades from no man's land, and such actions continue to earn medals for soldiers who do them. Sick leave highlights Sassoon's feeling that the brotherhood of soldiers, a brotherhood sealed in the blood of dead comrades, supersedes all other bonds. This idea is also related to the idea, frequently expressed in war poetry, that one had to be there in order to understand the war. This is another kind of brotherhood, one that assumes non-combatants could never know what the warrior knows. Ironically, then, much war writing is predicated on the notion that one cannot understand the war if one wasn't there, and simultaneously that there is no need to write for those who were there, because they understand better than the writer can convey. We'll see versions of this sentiment in All Quiet on the Western Front, as well as in The Forbidden Zone and many, many memoirs. The memoirs we read in Week 6 offer visceral narrations of battle. The letter from Lionel Sotheby to his mother, for instance, was never intended for publication, but only to inform his mother of his experience. It's less edited and less crafted than the memoirs written for publication, but at the same time, it does convey the sense that Sotheby's experiences had to be narrated in order to make sense even to him. The memoirs by Sassoon, Blunden, and Graves were all written about 10 years after the war, and they have the feeling of retrospectives. Time has passed, and the writers have a larger context for their storytelling. Nevertheless, we can see in the details they recall so sharply that the war has not released them. Blunden's memoir, Undertones of War, provides much of the background material Barker uses to write Regeneration, along with Owen's letters. Together, these sources provide what she needs to create Billy Pryor, her imaginary shell-shocked soldier. I am very interested in the tone of Undertones of War. There is something very blank and affectless about it. When he narrates the memory that became Billy Pryor's worst war experience, he sounds almost indifferent to the horror he experienced. Blunden is a good writer. He's not doing this by accident. Rather, he is essentially enacting shell-shock. He is numb to the horror not because he is unfeeling, but because his ability to feel has been shocked and outraged by his war experience. When he does come up with what might pass for normal feeling, it is feelings of devotion and gratitude to a little house where he once had a safe and comfortable night's sleep. Again, he is writing this 10 years after the war. That he remembers this one night of comfort so long after speaks more about the conditions of the war than over-the-top emotion in his piece ever could. Blunden, unlike the other soldiers whose writing we're reading this semester, was never wounded. So he spent nearly the whole war on the front lines without any break. For soldiers like Sassoon and Owen, being wounded gave them an opportunity to get away from the front and recuperate mentally while their bodies healed. Blunden didn't have that chance, and he emerged from the war one of the most psychologically wounded of the great war poets, although he never received treatment for his condition. His friends did raise money to send him on a cruise to Brazil. I don't know if this is an adequate treatment for severe PTSD, but certainly it's not used by any experts in treating shell shock, then or now. A text that shares qualities with both the short poems we've read this week and with the memoirs we read earlier is David Jones's In Parenthesis. From the title alone, we can see the way that Jones agrees with the common viewpoint that the war is somehow out of the regular timeline, a thing unto itself. Jones served as an enlisted man in the British Army, a member of a Welsh regiment that also had many Cockney members from London. The poem presents some challenges to contemporary American readers because it uses ancient Welsh poetry as well as early 20th century Cockney slang and diction to tell the story of Jones's experience of the war. The poem is also modernist, meaning it is experimental and is less interested in telling readers what to think than in finding out what readers can contribute to the meaning of the text. The passage you read is the last section of the book. In this passage, John Ball, the protagonist who is somewhat clumsy and confused, experiences the Battle of Mammoth Wood, a terrifying and destructive element of the Battle of the Somme. We note in this passage how many of his fellows have died during the course of his brief foray to the front. Jones portrays the confusion of battle, the numbness of soldiers who see disaster all around them, but who are unable to process loss because of the widespread mayhem. As when Ball sees the severed head of 72 Morgan, its visage grins like the Cheshire Cat and full grimly. As you read the poems and listen to the songs for this week, and as you remember the memoirs and fictional texts we've read, try to put it all in the context Rivers creates in his lecture, Repression of War Experience. The argument of this talk for his fellow physicians is that encouraging men to talk about their war experience helps them to heal from the traumas they've suffered, and that this treatment is far superior to encouraging shell-shocked soldiers to repress their feelings. Rivers' approach is consistent with current psychological practice. How do you think writing a letter like the one Sotheby wrote to his mother, or a poem like one of Owen's or Sassoon's, or a memoir years after the fact, might help a soldier process and heal from the traumas and losses of war? How does making light of the war in song help soldiers get through the ongoing psychological injuries of trench life and battle?